There is something about the horizon that heals a troubled mind. That is what drew me to this place. 40 acres of rolling prairie land far enough from the city to see stars, but close enough to civilization that I did not feel completely isolated. I had spent 20 years in corporate America, breathing recycled air and staring at pixelated screens until my vision blurred. The day I signed the deed to this ranch was the day I finally exhaled. I named it Horizon Hill, not very original perhaps, but honest. From the wraparound porch of my modest farmhouse, the land stretched out like a painting, golden grass swaying in the breeze, a small cluster of oak trees providing shade for my horses, and a natural pond where geese would stop during migration. It was not fancy. It was not pristine, but it was mine and it was genuine. The fence was my first major project. 6 months of backbreaking labor, digging post holes, stretching wire, securing gates. Every callus on my hands told the story of building that boundary. It was not just about keeping my horses and cattle safe, though that was important. It was about defining what was mine after decades of living in spaces designed by others. The fence marked where Whispering Pines estates ended and my freedom began. Whispering Pines. Even the name dripped with artificial pleasantry. The development had sprung up 3 years before I arrived, 200 identical homes with identical lawns arranged in concentric circles around a man-made lake. The developer had tried to buy my parcel too, but the previous owner refused to sell. I thanked him silently every morning when I watched the sun rise over my unobstructed view instead of vinyl siding and satellite dishes. That is how I came to live beside, but not within, the jurisdiction of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. On paper, they had no authority over my property. My deed was clear. My survey lines were unambiguous. The county records confirmed what I already knew. Their rules stopped at my fence line. But some people do not respect lines drawn on paper, or lines drawn in dirt, or lines of any kind, really. I first met Corinne Whitfield at the county farmers market 6 months after moving in. She approached with a smile that did not reach her eyes and a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "You must be the new owner of the eyesore property," she said, extending a hand tipped with French manicured nails. "I am Corinne Whitfield, president of the Whispering Pines HOA. We have been meaning to welcome you properly." I shook her hand and corrected her gently. "Horizon Hill is what I call it, and thank you, but I have been here half a year already." Her smile tightened. "Yes, well, we have been rather busy dealing with community matters. Your fence, for instance. It cuts off the walking path our residents have used for decades." I knew this was false. The satellite images I had studied before purchasing showed no path, and the previous owner had confirmed no easement existed. But I did not want conflict with my only neighbors. "I am not aware of any official path, but I am happy to look at county records if there is an easement I missed," I offered. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "We will be in touch," she said, turning on her heel. After that, the flyers began appearing, tucked under my windshield wiper at the grocery store, folded into my mailbox, slipped through the slats of my fence. Each one outlined some supposed violation or neighborhood concern. Improper fencing materials, livestock too close to residential areas, excessive vehicle parking. Each one carried the Whispering Pines letterhead and her signature at the bottom. I collected them all in a folder but took no action. Live and let live had always been my philosophy. I noticed the footprints one Tuesday morning, a neat line of designer sneaker impressions alongside smaller paw prints leading from a corner of my property toward the pond. I told myself it must be a coincidence, perhaps a lost hiker with a dog, but deep down I knew better. The tracks were too deliberate, too regular. Someone was testing boundaries, and not just the physical ones. That night, watching the sunset from my porch, I felt the first stirrings of unease. The wind carried voices from the direction of Whispering Pines, a homeowner's meeting in someone's backyard. I could not make out the words, but I heard laughter, and somehow I knew they were discussing me. The dawn revealed what malice had done under cover of darkness. I discovered it during my morning ride, a 5-foot section of fence wire neatly cut and rolled back, the clean edges showing this was no accident of nature. The post remained upright, but the barrier was breached. Deliberate, calculated, destructive. My blood ran cold when I realized my horses were not in their usual grazing spot. A quick scan of the pasture confirmed my fears. They had discovered the opening and wandered through it. Panic rising in my throat, I raced back to the stable, grabbed a lead rope, and set out to find them before disaster struck. 2 hours of frantic searching followed. My oldest mare, Willow, had wandered dangerously close to the county highway. The younger stallion, Thunder, had made it all the way to the Whispering Pines ornamental lake and was drinking casually while early morning joggers gawked and pointed. The third, a rescue named Penny, had thankfully stayed close to the opening, confused but unharmed. Leading the horses back one by one, sweat soaking my shirt despite the cool morning air, I could think only of how differently this could have ended. A spooked horse on a busy road. A panicked animal cornered by well-meaning but clueless suburbanites. The thought made my hands shake with equal parts fear and fury. Once the animals were secured, I repaired the fence temporarily and headed straight to my security cameras. I had installed them after the third notice from Karen, more out of caution than genuine concern. Now I was grateful for that decision. The footage was clear despite the early morning dimness. Karen Whitfield, dressed in expensive athletic wear, approached my fence at precisely 5:47 a.m. She looked around furtively before producing what appeared to be wire cutters from her designer fanny pack. Her small dog waited impatiently as she methodically cut through the fence wires, rolling them back to create an opening. She then strolled through with her dog, following the path to the pond, before returning 30 minutes later and exiting through the same gap. I watched the footage 3 times, scarcely believing the audacity. Then I printed several still frames and drove directly to her house, a large colonial at the entrance to Whispering Pines with HOA President proudly displayed on a placard in the front garden. Karen answered the door in the same outfit from the video, her face composed in practiced pleasantness that faltered when she recognized me. "You cut my fence," I said without preamble, holding up the photographs. "You endangered my livestock and damaged my property." Her expression never wavered. "I do not know what you are talking about. Those could be pictures of anyone. Besides, that old fence is a hazard. It restricts the traditional walking path our community has used for generations." "There is no legal walking path through my property," I stated firmly. "And these pictures clearly show you cutting my fence this morning." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You are being paranoid. Perhaps living alone out there is affecting your judgment." She smiled thinly. "I suggest you reconsider your hostile attitude toward the community. We were here first, after all." She closed the door in my face, leaving me standing there with pictures in hand and disbelief clouding my thoughts. That afternoon, I called both the HOA management company and the county animal control office. The HOA representative listened politely before explaining that Mrs. Whitfield was a valued community leader with an impeccable record of service. Any complaints against her would need to be submitted in writing and reviewed by the board, which she chaired. Animal control was similarly unhelpful. "Unless an animal is actually injured or causing a public hazard, we cannot intervene in what sounds like a neighbor dispute," the officer explained patiently. I hung up the phone and stared out at my damaged fence. The horses grazed peacefully now, unaware of how vulnerable they had been made by human malice. I repaired the section properly, adding thicker wire and a second layer of protection. As I hammered the last staple into place, I caught movement from the corner of my eye, Karen, standing at the edge of Whispering Pines property, watching me work. When our eyes met, she did not look away. She smiled and gave a little wave with her perfectly manicured fingers. Message received. This was not over. It had only just begun. The next violation came 3 days later. Karen, apparently emboldened by the lack of consequences, no longer waited for darkness. She cut through my fence in broad daylight, her little Pomeranian prancing beside her as she marched across my pasture to the pond. When I approached her, she simply turned up the volume on her earbuds and pretended not to hear my objections. This became her daily ritual, a morning constitutional across my property, using the path she had illegally created through my fence. I repaired the damage each time, and each time she returned with her wire cutters. It evolved into a grotesque game, one where she knew the rules, but I was somehow expected to accept defeat graciously. By the second week, the stakes escalated. The cuts became longer, the damage more extensive. No longer content with a small opening, Karen began removing entire sections of fencing. 5 feet became 10. 10 became 20. My mornings now began with fence repair instead of peaceful reflection. "You know this is illegal," I told her during one confrontation, my voice tight with restrained anger. "This is criminal trespassing and destruction of property." She removed one earbud and tilted her head. "Oh, and who exactly will stop me? The sheriff who lives in Whispering Pines? Or perhaps the mayor whose wife serves on my charity committee?" Her smile was cold. "Accept reality. This is a community path now." The following weekend brought a new level of audacity. I returned from a supply run to find not just Karen, but 15 Whispering Pines residents walking through my property, following her like obedient ducklings as she conducted what appeared to be an official neighborhood nature walk. They carried water bottles with the HOA logo and wore matching visors. Some took photos of my home and outbuildings. One man had the nerve to peer through my stable windows. I called the town mediator, a retired judge who handled minor disputes before they reached the court system. He agreed to host a meeting between Karen and myself the following Tuesday. The meeting was a masterclass in manipulation. Karen arrived with 3 HOA board members and a folder of documents. She spoke softly, reasonably, expressing community concerns about my unsupervised livestock and hazardous fencing practices. She presented printed pages from equine websites, highlighting passages about proper enclosure methods out of context. She had photos of my fence, the very sections she had damaged, marked with red circles to indicate dangerous conditions. "We simply want what is best for everyone," she concluded, dabbing at her eye with a tissue. "The walking path has historical significance to our community, and his aggressive reactions have left many residents feeling threatened." The mediator, clearly swayed by her performance, suggested I consider community harmony and explore compromise options, such as allowing scheduled access through my property. I left the meeting seething, knowing I had been outmaneuvered in a game I had not even known I was playing. The rumors began spreading after that. At the feed store, conversations would halt when I entered. The barista at the local coffee shop, normally chatty, avoided eye contact. I overheard fragments in the hardware store: "Unstable, threatening, dangerous loner." I realized I needed to protect myself, not just my property. I installed additional cameras covering every angle of the fence line. I posted large, "No trespassing" signs at 50-foot intervals. I reinforced the fence with heavier gauge wire and added padlocked gates at strategic points. Karen's response came in the form of an official HOA complaint delivered by certified mail. My fencing was deemed visually offensive, my security cameras invasive of community privacy, and my signage hostile and detrimental to neighborhood aesthetics. The letter demanded I remove these nuisances within 10 days or face appropriate community action. I folded the letter carefully and added it to my growing file of evidence. That night, looking out over my land that no longer felt like the peaceful haven I had sought, I made a decision. If Karen wanted to play games with rules she invented, it was time to introduce her to rules she could not manipulate. The law of the land, enforced by those who took oaths to uphold it. The time for patience had ended. Tomorrow I would call the sheriff. Sheriff James Thornton did not look like a man who tolerated nonsense. His weathered face told the story of 30 years in law enforcement, most of them spent outdoors in all conditions. He arrived in a department SUV, but stepped out wearing boots that had clearly seen their share of pasture mud. This was not a desk jockey with a badge. This was a lawman who understood country living. "Show me everything," he said after introductions, declining my offer of coffee with a polite wave. "Start at the beginning." I led him through the property, pointing out each area where the fence had been repeatedly cut. We walked the perimeter, and I highlighted the path Karen had established through repeated trespassing. At the house, I presented my evidence folder: photographs, videos, dated records of each incident, copies of my deed and property survey, the HOA letters, screenshots of social media posts where Whispering Pines residents discussed their nature walks on my land. Sheriff Thornton reviewed everything methodically, asking occasional questions but mostly listening in silence. When he finished, he closed the folder and met my gaze directly. "You have been more patient than most would be," he stated flatly. "What she is doing is criminal trespassing, property damage, and potentially animal endangerment, clear violations of county code and state law." He stood, adjusting his belt with its impressive array of tools. "I will pay Mrs. Whitfield a visit today. This stops now." I followed him outside, almost light-headed with relief that someone in authority finally understood. As he prepared to leave, the sheriff paused by his vehicle. "I grew up on a cattle ranch outside of town," he said unexpectedly. "Fence cutting was something you just did not do, not ever." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Some folks move out here from the city thinking rules are different in the country. They need to learn they are right. Our rules go deeper. They matter more because out here they keep people and animals alive." I watched him drive away, allowing myself to hope that perhaps this would be the end of the matter. That hope lasted exactly 4 hours. Corinne's glossy white SUV rolled slowly past my driveway that afternoon. She did not stop, but she did not need to. The message in her deliberate drive-by was clear. The sheriff's visit had not deterred her. The next morning confirmed it. A new section of fence was down, larger than before, with the wire ends twisted in ways that showed deliberate malice rather than mere passage. Sheriff Thornton had gotten under her skin, and this was her response. Worse, I found fresh hoofprints leading onto the county road. My heart pounding, I searched frantically until I located all 3 horses safely back on my property. But the evidence was clear. At least one had escaped, wandered onto public roads, and returned by chance rather than design. The potential for tragedy had been immense. This time, when I called Sheriff Thornton, his friendly demeanor had hardened into something more official. "I spoke with her yesterday," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "She denied everything, claimed she was friends with the mayor's wife and several county commissioners, said she would be making calls if I continued to harass her." "And now this," I said, sending him photos of the new damage. There was a long pause before he responded. "Document everything. Take more pictures. Save the cut wire sections. Do not touch them with your bare hands. I will send a deputy to collect them for evidence." "Evidence?" "Yes," he said firmly. "I am preparing charges: trespassing, property damage, animal endangerment, possibly criminal mischief. She needs to understand this is not a neighborhood dispute anymore. This is a criminal matter." True to his word, a deputy arrived that afternoon, collected the evidence, and took additional photographs. Before leaving, he handed me an official notice to post on my property, clarifying that trespassers would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I placed the notice prominently at the property line facing Whispering Pines. Within an hour, Corinne had driven by to see it. This time she stopped, rolled down her window, and took a photograph of the sign with her phone. Her expression, even from a distance, was not concern or regret. It was rage. The formal warning only fueled Corinne's determination to assert dominance over my property and my life. 3 days after the deputy's visit, 2 county inspectors arrived unannounced at my gate. They looked uncomfortable as they explained the purpose of their visit. An anonymous complaint had been filed alleging animal neglect and unsafe property conditions. "We have to investigate all formal complaints," the older inspector explained apologetically. "Standard procedure." I welcomed them onto the property, knowing I had nothing to hide. For 2 hours, they examined every inch of my ranch: the horses' living conditions, feed quality, water sources, fence integrity, what remained of it, outbuilding safety and waste management systems. They took photographs, made notes, collected water samples from the pond, and interviewed me about my animal care routines. At the conclusion, the lead inspector closed his notebook with a definitive snap. "Your facility exceeds compliance standards in every category," he stated. "In fact, I wish all the properties we inspected were kept this well." He hesitated before adding, "Between us, this complaint seems targeted. The specific allegations do not match anything we observed here." I thanked them for their thoroughness and professionalism. After they left, I sat on my porch, piecing together what had just happened. Karen had not simply wanted to annoy me with an inspection. She had tried to have my animals confiscated and my property condemned. This was no longer about a walking path. This was about removing me entirely. That evening, my phone began buzzing with text messages from the few local acquaintances I had made. "Have you seen what they are saying about you online?" One read, with a screenshot attached. The Whispering Pines community Facebook page featured a lengthy post from Karen, detailing her frightening encounter with the unstable element at the neighboring property. She described feeling threatened during her community advocacy work and expressed grave concerns about the dangerous conditions permitted to exist so close to family homes. The comments section overflowed with supportive outrage from residents who had never set foot on my property. They discussed organizing a community action committee. Some suggested contacting local media. One person recommended a petition to have the county condemn that eyesore once and for all. I closed the app, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. The disconnect between reality and Karen's fabricated narrative was staggering. What disturbed me most was how easily people believed her, how readily they accepted that I was the villain in this story simply because she said so. The vandalism came 2 nights later. I was awakened at 3 a.m. by the sound of my security system alert. The camera feed showed shadowy figures moving around my barn. By the time I reached the structure, they were gone, but their message remained. Crude words spray-painted across the barn door, broken security lights, and feed bags slashed open, their contents strewn across the ground. I photographed everything before cleaning up the mess, then sent the images and security footage to Sheriff Thornton. The video was too dark to identify faces clearly, but the timestamp and direction of approach, directly from Whispering Pines, told its own story. The sheriff called back within the hour. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice grave. "But we need irrefutable evidence to make charges stick. These people are connected, and they know how to work the system." "What do you suggest?" I asked, exhaustion evident in my voice. "Hidden cameras," he replied. "High definition, motion-activated, placed where they would not expect. We need to catch them in the act with no possibility of denial." That day, I installed 6 additional cameras concealed in trees, fence posts, and outbuilding eaves. These were not the visible security cameras Karen knew about. These were Hunter's trail cameras, designed to blend into natural surroundings and activate silently when motion was detected. I reinforced the damaged fence sections again, but left one area subtly weaker than the rest, a honeypot for would-be trespassers. Then I waited, sleeping lightly, jumping at every nocturnal sound. The ranch that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a fortress under siege. But sieges end, and usually not well for those who started them. The trap was sprung at 6:17 a.m. on a crystal-clear Saturday morning. My phone buzzed with motion alerts from the hidden cameras, and I watched in real time as Karen approached the fence line. This time, she was not alone. 2 other women, HOA board members I recognized from the mediation meeting, stood lookout while Karen worked. She had come prepared, heavy-duty bolt cutters instead of wire clippers, gardening gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. A bandana pulled up over the lower half of her face, though her distinctive blonde bob and designer exercise outfit were unmistakable. The cameras captured everything in perfect high-definition clarity, her methodical cutting of the fence wires, her satisfied examination of the damage, her smug nod to her companions. The 3 women stepped through the opening, and Karen unleashed her Pomeranian from its jeweled leash. The dog immediately darted away, racing toward the pond with excited yaps. Karen and her friends followed at a leisurely pace, pointing at my home and laughing among themselves. This was not a walk. This was a victory lap. But their triumph was short-lived. The unleashed dog, excited by unfamiliar scents, suddenly changed direction and bolted toward the county road. Karen's calls went unheeded as the small animal disappeared through the roadside brush. Cursing audibly, she and her companions ran after it. The hidden camera near the road captured what happened next. A pickup truck swerved sharply to avoid the dog as it darted into the lane. The vehicle skidded, narrowly missing the animal before regaining control. Karen finally caught up and grabbed her pet, exchanging heated words with the driver before retreating back toward my property. I downloaded all the footage immediately and sent it to Sheriff Thornton with a text message. Caught everything. Criminal trespassing, property damage, unleashed dog causing road hazard. His response was immediate. Stay put, do not engage, on my way. I expected the Sheriff's Department SUV. What I did not expect was the sight that appeared at my gate 30 minutes later. Sheriff James Thornton arrived on horseback. He rode a magnificent chestnut quarter horse with a white star on its forehead, his uniform crisp, his badge catching the morning sun. He dismounted at my gate with the easy grace of a man who had spent more time in a saddle than behind a desk. Thought this called for something special, he said by way of explanation, nodding toward his horse. Footage is clear as day. We are going to pay Mrs. Whitfield a visit, and I wanted to make an impression. I offered to drive over, but the sheriff shook his head. She has been treating your property like a public park. Seems only fitting we approach this the old-fashioned way. He gestured to a path that cut through the back of my property and emerged directly across from Karen's colonial home. If you are up for a ride, that is. 20 minutes later, we crossed onto Whispering Pines property, Sheriff Thornton on his chestnut and me on Willow. The sight of two mounted riders proceeding down the pristine suburban street drew curtains aside and brought residents onto their perfectly manicured lawns. Some took pictures, others called to neighbors. By the time we reached Karen's house, we had accumulated quite an audience. Karen was in her front garden, still in her exercise clothes, when she saw us approach. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching fear as Sheriff Thornton dismounted and formally addressed her. Karen Whitfield, he began, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. I am here regarding multiple criminal complaints filed against you, including willful destruction of property, criminal trespassing, animal endangerment, and creating a public hazard. Karen's face blanched. She looked around at the gathering neighbors, her loyal subjects witnessing her fall from grace. This is ridiculous, she stammered. I have done nothing wrong. The sheriff removed a tablet from his saddlebag and played the morning's video footage at maximum volume. Her voice, her face, her actions, all undeniable in the crystal-clear recording. I have a court summons requiring your appearance next Monday, Sheriff Thornton continued, producing an official envelope. Additional charges may be filed pending further investigation. Karen stood frozen, the court summons extended toward her, the neighbors' phones recording every moment of her humiliation. Her empire was crumbling before her eyes, and all she could do was watch. The legal proceedings that followed were anticlimactic compared to the sheriff's dramatic arrival at Karen's doorstep. Faced with irrefutable video evidence and a growing list of charges, Karen's attorney negotiated a plea agreement that included substantial fines, restitution for all damages to my property, and a restraining order barring her from coming within 100 yards of my fence line. More satisfying than the legal consequences was the community fallout. The HOA president resigned within a week, citing personal reasons that everyone understood to mean avoiding association with the scandal. An emergency board election removed Karen and her closest allies from their positions of power. The new leadership immediately issued a formal apology to me, distancing themselves from what they now called unauthorized actions by individual members. The neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now went out of their way to greet me in town. Some stopped by the ranch with awkward apologies and peace offerings, home-baked goods, bottles of wine, offers to help repair fencing. I accepted their gestures graciously, understanding that many had simply been manipulated by a convincing bully. One elderly gentleman who had lived in Whispering Pines since its founding visited specifically to explain that there had never been any historical walking path through my property. She made that up whole cloth, he admitted. Nobody crossed that land before Karen got it in her head that the rules did not apply to her. The sheriff made a final official visit to inspect the repaired fencing, which now gleamed with new heavy-gauge wire and reinforced posts. Motion-sensing security lights illuminated the entire perimeter, and clear, no trespassing signs stood at regular intervals, all paid for by Karen's restitution payment. "You have created quite the fortress," Sheriff Thornton observed, leaning against his patrol vehicle. "Peace of mind does not come cheap these days," I replied. He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, most folks would have escalated this much sooner, gotten angry, made threats. You played it smart, documented everything, followed proper channels, let the law work as intended." "I came out here for peace," I said simply. "Fighting would have defeated the purpose." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Well, looks like you will have your peace now. Word around town is that Karen has listed her house, moving to some gated community across the state." The news brought no joy, only relief. I had never wanted an enemy. I had only wanted what was rightfully mine, the quiet enjoyment of my property and the safety of my animals. In the months that followed, life at Horizon Hill settled back into the rhythms I had originally sought. Dawn rides across dew-covered pastures. Evenings spent on the porch watching the stars emerge. The fence stood unbreached, a solid boundary between my world and everything beyond. Karen's house sold well below market value despite the hot real estate market. The moving trucks came on a rainy Tuesday. I watched from my property line as workers loaded her designer furniture and professionally organized closets. She emerged only once to supervise the loading of her Pomeranian's custom dog house. Our eyes met briefly across the distance. She turned away first. The new owners of her colonial were a young family with 3 small children who waved enthusiastically whenever they saw me in town. They sent a neighborly note introducing themselves and assuring me they had no interest in walking paths or HOA politics, just quiet living and good fences. As for me, I found that standing my ground had changed something fundamental in how I viewed my sanctuary. It was no longer just a retreat from the world's chaos. It was a place I had fought for and defended. The fence line was not just a boundary, it was a statement. This far and no further. The horizon still heals a troubled mind. But now, watching the sun set over my pasture, I understand something I did not before. Peace is not just the absence of conflict. Sometimes peace is what you earn by facing conflict with dignity and determination. And sometimes, justice really does arrive on horseback.